Hello, everyone. So, good afternoon. I'm not sure where all of you are. I'm in the GTA, so it's about 1 o'clock here, exactly, actually. So, I guess we'll get started. First of all, thank you so much for attending and joining me this afternoon for a presentation on supporting intersectional needs of refugees with disabilities. My name is Sakina Dada, and I'm here today on behalf of Smile Canada Support Services. Throughout the presentation, I'll share some stories. Stories of refugees with disabilities, newcomers who I have the privilege of working with. I will keep their names anonymous or use pseudonyms to protect their privacy. But I share these stories because they're real. They're lived experiences and thoughts and ideas and opinions. They're people's identities and oppressions all mixed in together. So while we will get into a bit of conceptual frameworks around the concepts of displacement and disablement, no theory can override a story. No theory can override one's experience. But while I share these stories throughout the presentation, you'll also see that while it's not a single story, not a homogeneous story, there are some connections that can guide us on how we support refugees with disabilities and their families. Throughout the presentation, you'll also see some pictures of incredibly cute children. And while I have permission to share these pictures, I ask that you do not take screenshots, just to protect the intention behind the pictures. So to start off, I just want to take a moment to reflect. It's important for me to acknowledge the long-standing history that has brought me to reside on this land, to seek to understand my place in this history. So I'll acknowledge my presence on Indigenous lands, the presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations, the area known as Toronto, which has been taken care of by the Anishinaabeg Nation, and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Huron-Wendat. I acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the territory subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. I acknowledge both the historical and ongoing impacts of colonialism and settler colonialism. A little bit about me to start. I'm going to start this conversation by saying I am not a refugee. I do not and cannot speak for refugees, nor can I say that I have experience as a refugee. I was born in Kitchener-Waterloo, Ontario, for those of you who know where that is. It's fairly small, I guess, compared to Toronto. My parents, a few years prior, immigrated from Tanzania. I'm the mother of Hamza and Aya, very energetic, and Hamza's a very energetic 8-year-old, and Aya's a very calm 5-year-old. I have the privilege of engaging in research on the national and transnational narratives around displacement and disablement. For about a decade, which I think might give away my age, I've practiced as a pediatric occupational therapist. And in 2008, I founded an organization called Smile Canada Support Services. A little bit about Smile. We're an organization dedicated to supporting racialized children and youth with disabilities and their families. Our focus area is on the diverse Muslim communities in Canada, including refugee and new immigrant families. Most recently, Smile supports 368 families, of which I would say over 1/3 are newcomers to Canada. Smile is guided by the principle of equity, We're focused on the elimination of barriers that limit the ability to fully engage, participate, be included in our society. But in all aspects, social, cultural, spiritual fabric of our communities. I'm often asked, why a priority population? Isn't it that all services should support all people? All organizations should be there for everyone. So, a more prepared answer would be what you see here on the screen. That racialized communities, particularly racialized communities that of people with disabilities, face intersectional oppressions, health inequities, which especially in the context of COVID, we've been hearing about it on the news and in the statistics reports that we might be familiar with. That there are significant health disparities for racialized and disabled populations. The impacts of social determinants of health on these populations and the lack of cultural responsive and cultural safe practices that exist. But that's more of the formal answer. The short answer is if all organizations were for everyone, if all organizations met the needs for everyone, we probably wouldn't be here having this conversation. When we talk about refugees with disabilities, I wanted to give some context here. 1 in 5 Canadians, and this is a statistic from 2017, approximately 1 in 5 Canadians, which is 22% of our population aged 15 years and over 6.2 million people identify as having one or more disabilities. When it comes to refugees with disabilities, we don't have a ton of data. But what we do know is that persons with disabilities continue to be one of the most exposed and excluded groups in any displaced society. We also know that once settled, the experiences of refugees with disabilities are largely ignored. Many refugees with disabilities in Canada live in poor conditions, struggle to obtain financial aid, social support, and access to primary healthcare and social services. Now, this latter point is interesting because the myth is that primary healthcare is for everyone in Canada. But think about it. Do you or anyone you know not have access to a family physician? Do you or anyone you know not know where to go? Not have support for, not be able to afford dental care or be able to go to an optometrist and get a pair of glasses? You see, primary healthcare, first of all, doesn't cover all forms of healthcare, but also primary healthcare is reserved. Not everyone gets access to it. And this is a very interesting point because I think there's a myth that everything is for everyone. The United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs in 2019 reported that there are no reliable statistics on the social, environmental, or economic barriers, trauma, or abuse that disabled refugees face. But what we do know is that refugees with disabilities have a higher risk of ongoing trauma, a higher risk of exploitation and abuse, and are at a much, much higher risk of abandonment. Unfortunately, as many of you might be aware, there's this survival of the fittest philosophy that significantly impacts persons with disabilities and significantly impacts refugees. And today we're going to talk about that intersection. The part that I find most difficult, and this is just a personal opinion, is refugees with disabilities are ignored within humanitarian spheres, including programs designed to support persons who are displaced. Through services like social services, housing services, education supports. And I will address this in, the coming slides on intersectionality and intersectional experiences and oppressions. But here in Canada, we have support agencies that help people with food and with access to housing and with, getting a job. And many, many of those agencies and those organizations leave out persons with disabilities altogether. I recently spoke with a mom from Smile who reported that when she arrived to Canada from Jordan, and she fled Syria, she went to Jordan. She was living in Jordan in a refugee camp, and then she came to Canada. Her and her partner both live with disabilities, and their child lives with a disability. And what she told me is when she arrived here, she was placed in inaccessible housing. She said it wasn't humiliating, it wasn't embarrassing, it was way beyond that. It was so unjust that every day I would wake up and I wouldn't be able to go to parts of my house because I can't get to them. I mentioned earlier that I'm going to touch a little bit on theoretical models or frameworks. And I'm doing this because I think it's important to begin the conversation when we talk about refugees with disabilities, to say that we're not talking about impairments. We're not talking about somebody's ability to communicate verbally or to walk independently. We are talking about the systems that make and keep people in certain positions that prevent them from accessing quality education and meaningful employment, positions that prevent them from getting appropriate and adequate healthcare services and the supports that they need. The traditional biomedical model of disability, it really identifies disability as an individual's problem, an individual's impairment. And the idea behind that is if one has an individual problem, the onus is on oneself to fix it. A key feature of such rhetoric or such an idea is that able-bodied is what we should have. Able-bodied is, let's say, the norm. But that means that disabled or persons with disabilities then are away from that norm, away from that ideal. This is extremely problematic. The result of such classification is catastrophic. It means we regulate every single part of a person with a disability, every part of their life. We shortchange them. We say, okay, you know what? We don't need adequate education and meaningful employment. Let's just give whatever employment's out there. Let's give some basic education. But it's because we're not looking at our systems. Instead, we say, this is how it should be, and this is how some people are. And those people, as a result, get pushed to the margins of society. So the social model of disability moved away from that and said, no, like race, disability is a social construct. And instead of looking at prevention and cure and rehabilitation, which of course we still look at, but instead of a focus on that, we have to look at our policies, our practices. What do we have in our policies that that make and keep people in these positions? Why is it that some people can get a job so easily, but others can't? The human rights model takes it in a different direction, and many of you are familiar with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the United Nations Convention. With the formation of the CRPD, we look at disability rights as human rights. They shouldn't be different. Now, for those of you who are from Toronto, there's a slogan that we might be familiar with. And that is, diversity is our strength. Diversity is our strength. And yeah, I agree, diversity is a strength. But what happens is disability gets left out of the diversity conversation. When we talk about diversity, we talk about race and ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, but disability becomes left out. It's considered a medical thing, an individual thing. So the human rights model embraces disability as a component of human diversity. This model highlights the importance of having rights legislation, that the involvement of all persons, regardless of socio-political affiliation, economic status, social and cultural factors. But there's still something missing. And I believe this is addressed most recently in a transnational framework that allows us to challenge and understand disablement. How does it occur in the context of our colonial history, our settler colonialism present day? Whether disablement occurs through birth or injury or social circumstance or poverty, the transnational disability approach doesn't ignore the impacts of global issues, such as international conflict, which leads us to have refugees, or climate change, for example. This framework accounts for intersectional experiences and oppressions and includes the contextual nature of disability, a point often ignored. So while the CRPD has become the gold standard for promoting disability rights, and I believe we must in all of our spaces promote disability rights as human rights and refugee rights as human rights, we have to look at the material conditions that really are telling us how people are surviving. How are they living? Are they living meaningful lives? Or are they being ignored? So I want to talk a little bit about context. As a pediatric OT in the spaces that I've worked, at times I've brought up this conversation and quickly told that we can't talk politics. We can't talk politics because the hospital is not a space for talking politics. I find at times the university is not a space for talking politics. But when we talk about stories, our stories, the stories of others, our narratives, our real life narratives that tell us where we've been and somewhat predict where we're going to go if things do not get better, we have to acknowledge and listen and engage these narratives and their connectedness to human experience by paying attention to social, political, and economic contexts. I am very intrigued by the work of Parendosa, who talks about storied content and the multiple ways in which stories are expressed, and how we have to pay attention to those larger social and political and economic contexts to understand how stories are expressed and understood. disregarding the context in this particular conversation, I won't speak to other conversations, would be a blatant disregard for our reality. So I'm going to share a few examples from my own reflections, but you might have your own examples. As I was preparing for this presentation and the work that I've been engaged with in my own research and working with Smile Canada, a few conversations, a few stories surfaced. A father who is with Smile, he said to me, they don't flinch when bodies show up on their lands. Why would they flinch with us? Referring to the hundreds of bodies of Indigenous children found in the fields of residential schools. And what he said after, he said the public outcry is faint. And I thought about that quite a bit. That on the news one day we hear something and on the next it's no longer news. When we think about context, we think about the ongoing anti-Black racism that perpetuates our institutions, so much so that our public schools are being assessed for oppressive curriculums. When I think about context in 2021, I think about the rise of Islamophobia, where it was just months ago when a Muslim family was plowed down in London, Ontario in broad daylight because of their culture and their faith. When I think about context in 2021, I think about discriminatory policies and laws that exist in Quebec, for example, with Bill 21. That as a person who wears hijab, I can't be a public school teacher. And the last point I wanted to make as I was reflecting on this particular topic of acknowledging the context, that we're in a space where the word Palestine makes one censured by a very institution that prides itself on academic freedoms. When examining needs of refugees with disabilities is so important to look at our context, historical and present day. Because what's happening here and what's happening around us not only impacts our policies, our laws, but then impacts our practices, our attitudes, how we approach people, how we treat them. And it creates barriers for people to learn, to grow, to socialize, to have meaningful relationships, to live meaningful lives. It would be inappropriate for me to talk about context and miss out, the elephant in the room, as the saying goes, considering we're having this discussion virtually. That we are in a global active pandemic where the lives of so many have been lost. And the disparities that exist between those who are racialized and disabled, as I mentioned earlier, have become so apparent, yet continue to be ignored. In January of 2020, the WHO reported that first case of COVID-19. And since then, over 4.9 million deaths worldwide. And of course, the virus has disrupted every aspect of human life and brutally worsened the challenges for displaced persons. Approximately 160 countries partially or entirely closed their borders. So what happens to refugees? While there's some that have made exceptions, it's not just about accepting people, it's what comes with that. How are people when they come here? Recently, my team and I, we've been having a lot of conversations with families. Like I said, many Smile families are refugees, children with disabilities, are newcomers to Canada. And of course, school closures and vaccines and restrictions and all of that has impacted all of us in some way or the other, of course. But there are a few things that really, really make it tricky when it comes to sharing of information, for example. I mentioned my children, Hamza and Aya. They go to public school in the Peel region. I communicate with their teachers through an app. It's convenient. I actually have a notification right now. If there's a message, it's called Remind, and I click on it and the teacher will send me a note or a message about my child. I might get a picture. It's very convenient. I love it. But there's an assumption that one has a smartphone, that one can navigate such technology, that one speaks in English. There are so many assumptions that come with doing this. And the difficulty is we are making these assumptions all the time. And there's an inaccessibility for people with disabilities, different disabilities. There's an inaccessibility for people who don't speak English as a first language or who might not be familiar with technology. So I just want to pause 1 second and just say that if I'm not paying attention to the chat, so if I'm speaking too quickly or if somebody has a question, please just let me know. There's a scholar, Fuad, in an article he wrote in 2021 discussing the risk factors of COVID-19 on refugee populations. And I think we can, maybe reflect a little bit on why people who are in enclosed spaces, in tight-knit spaces, who might not have access to PPE, personal protective equipment, or who might not have access to information, why those rates would be higher. And although, upon reflection, we might have some ideas, even though we might not be in the field, even though we know this, there is very little being done about it. So again, going on to the topic of narratives. We have national and transnational narratives that I'd like us to explore just for a minute. Our stories, like I said, our lives do not exist in isolation. But our story is often pinned against a single story, a dominant story. Dominant cultural narratives influence our policies and our practices by reiterating a single story. And I'll give an example, so bear with me. These stories are recorded in our newspapers and history books. They convey one side of a complex, multifaceted account, which is why when we talk about refugees with disabilities, we have to think about this narrative. What's being taught in the classroom and perpetuated in literature, music, arts, social media, that's a big one. But what's being plastered on local and international headlines? Canada's response, for example, to the Syrian refugee crisis was largely homogenized. And without saying too much, I will say that is in part because we are pinned against our neighbors to the south. So when you're pinned against a country that might not be doing a lot, maybe what you're doing is considered heroic. But what happens is those who are welcomed are considered lucky. And that narrative around being lucky has this attachment that one must be grateful. That one must be grateful for Canada's protection, grateful to be here. And I can't tell you how many times that I've heard this from the individuals that I work with. That I know I should be grateful. I know I should be happy that I'm one of the lucky ones. I've also heard this from my healthcare colleagues. I've heard from healthcare colleagues they should be grateful. They should be grateful that they are here. That rhetoric means that the treatment of refugees with disabilities can go unnoticed. Like I said, this discourse around able-bodied versus disabled, and this narrative around what a refugee is supposed to be gets largely covered by these dominant stories. And I'll give you a very quick example. This was an article that came out in 2018. It reads, "No space in Windsor's temporary shelters for Toronto refugees." Migrants, particularly refugees, I don't know if you all are listening to the news, but there were some comments made recently about immigrants and refugees, about being financial burdens for Canadian governments, for the Canadian government or smaller governments, and for taxpayers. Media headlines such as "No space in Windsor's temporary shelter for Toronto refugees" portrays an idea that refugees are taking advantage of social welfare and are taking up space reserved for real Canadians. Now, of course, we all know that there's no truth in that. But that narrative, as it gets plastered in a headline that doesn't seem maybe so bad, that narrative reiterates this idea that refugees, they're taking up this space. Do you know persons with disabilities have a similar narrative against them over and over and over again? It's ongoing. There's so much literature around this, around decitizenship and being a citizen but not being treated like a citizen. This idea that people are a financial burden because they might require some support, some equipment, some services. This idea that some people can have full employment and others can't, and as a result, that they will be a burden. That idea of burden is extremely, extremely problematic. But also, I will say that dominant narrative that depicts Canada as a global leader on human rights focused on welcoming refugees also is problematic. It shifts our gaze from looking at the barriers and the challenges that exist. There was a Canadian journalist and professor at Ryerson University, Kamal Al-Sulaili, shared his hesitation in a 2016 article, and I'm going to read out what it said in the CIBC article. It says, Al-Sulaili says he understands why stories about acts of kindness and refugees' first visits to Tim Hortons, I think we've all seen those video clips, resonate with journalists and with their audiences. However, those feel-good stories suck out the oxygen out of important stories about what life in Canada is really like for immigrants and refugees after the welcome is over. Kind of goes back into that idea that those accepted into the Canadian system are considered lucky. and must then ultimately be grateful. Being accepted is framed as a privilege and not as a right. And like I said, from my limited experience, and I said at the beginning, I'm not a refugee. But from the stories that I've had the privilege of sharing, and I'll get to a very important one in a second, that privilege means that the mistreatment of refugees with disabilities go without notice. So I'm going to share one example. It's a very, very powerful example for me. A few years ago, I received a call from a principal in Toronto in a public school. The principal called me regarding a child that I work with at Smile Canada, a Syrian refugee. And the principal said that they called me regarding a disruptive, non-compliant, disabled student who could not remain in the current classroom environment. I said, okay. When you start off like that, okay, what's going on? The principal gave me 3 reasons. The first one, the child did not know how to use basic classroom tools. Doesn't know how to use a pencil sharpener, can't operate a pair of scissors, is so confused about what these things are. I said, okay. Secondly, that the child had difficulty interacting with other children. I said, okay. And finally, that every time the bell rang, the child hid under their desk with their head between their legs, and they rocked back and forth. And I said, okay. And some of you might have come to the same conclusion that I did. And I'll address that. In my mind, I went through point A, point B, and point C. And I came up with reasons why the principal was saying that. And I could be right, I could be wrong, but right away I came up with some reasons. And I'll share mine. You might have similar ones or different ones. I said, well, the child doesn't know how to, and I know the child, so I knew the child's, a little bit of the child's background. I knew their story, or one of their stories, rather. And so I said, well, to myself, I didn't get a chance to say it out loud. I said, well, the child not knowing how to operate classroom tools, I knew the child was never in formal education. They had moved to a host country and because of their disability, did not get access to a school. I knew the child in a refugee camp may not have had experience with one of those pencil sharpeners. Regarding communication, I knew the child didn't speak English as a first language. And perhaps if you don't speak the language as your peers, you might not be communicating very well. You might not be able to develop certain relationships. You may. And for the final point, I knew for a fact that that child had heard sounds where that bell ring may mimic some of those oppressive sounds. But I'll share with you, and I've shared this story so many times, and I apologize, but I get choked up every single time. But not at any of that stuff. I get choked up with the last piece. That the principal said, I know what you're going to say. He came from a war-torn country, but how long will we use that as an excuse? Before I had a chance to respond with what I thought would be that logical explanation that I shared with you, the principal overshadowed anything that I would have said. And while the principal's comment was so shocking to my core, it was reflective of a narrative that was much, much bigger than this conversation. A narrative that you're here and you have to get over it and you have to move on and you have to be grateful. When we talk about intersectional needs of refugees with disabilities, and I promise, I hope to come full circle, is we talk about this idea of intersectionality. And that term intersectionality has kind of been used, I think, recently. It's just my own opinion. It's like a catchword. Synonymous to diversity. It's not. Intersectionality is not diversity. Kimberly Crenshaw, the famous Kimberly Crenshaw, coined the term in response to the ongoing anti-Black institutional racism impacting Black women, particularly in the context of employment and then later on in the context of gun violence in the United States. And Crenshaw talks about intersectionality as identifying the impact of social structures and how individuals experience that social, political, and economic circumstance that surrounds them. But intersectionality is not just about identities. It's not about me getting up here saying, I identify as 5 things. How many do you identify as? It's not about that. It's not about counting and competing. It's about how structures make certain identities the consequence for the vehicle of vulnerability. It's about context. What is happening and what is going on? What policies impact us? What policies sideline us? What institutional structures play a role in exclusion? Our identities intersect. We can't tear them apart even if we try. My experience as a Muslim woman is not the same as my experience if I were a Muslim man. My experience as a person of color is not the same as my experience if I were not a person of color. When we talk about refugees with disabilities, we have to look at intersecting identities, intersecting experiences, and, I'll get to it soon, intersecting oppressions. I want to share one other story, and I think this is the last one. We'll see. But this is the story of Marwah. I changed, like I mentioned earlier, her name is not actually Marwah, but we decided on Marwah for this presentation. She likes the name Marwah. Marwah is a young girl who lives in Mississauga. She attends a public school. Before the pandemic, her mother shared a story with me that hit me very closely. And her mom said that prior to the pandemic, there was a time where parents were allowed into schools. We're not allowed in schools anymore, but there was this time. It existed, in 2019, I guess. But mom was asked to come into school by a parent. I just want to say I have one participant on my screen and you're smiling at my joke, so I really, really appreciate it. I appreciate you. So Marwah's mom was called in, and she went in, and the teacher says to Marwah's mom that, she has a disability, right? And Marwah's mom's like, yes, I know that. And because of her disability, she stands out. And we're really working on trying to get her integrated into the class. So Marwah's mom's like, okay, right? She said, so we had a suggestion for your family. Okay, what is it? That Marwah wears this coat over top of her clothes. She wears like a shirt and pants, and then she puts on this added coat. It actually makes her stand out. She already stands out because she's the only one with a disability in the class. But now when she wears this coat, she stands out even more. And I think it's unfair for her. So for her sake, I think you should tell her not to wear the coat. Her mom explained to me she's referring to a jilbab, a garment worn in many parts of the Middle East and other countries, and other spaces rather. Many people wear jilbab in Canada. It's like a coat that you put off over top of your clothing. Not hot, actually. So Marwah's mom said, okay, you're the teacher, you know best. If you think she should take it off, then I'll tell her to take it off. Marwah's mom came to me a few months later, and she said, I asked Marwah, how does she feel in class now? She said, since they asked me to take it off, I feel like I'm no longer one of them. Her mom said, why? You look a little more like them. She said, because I'm from Syria. I am proud of my family and my friends, and when I was with my friends, that's how we dressed. Now, what's interesting about this story, different than the story of the principal, is that to many people, it might not seem that bad. This teacher might have great intentions. But for Marwah, that her culture is part of who she is. It is her identity. Her disability is her identity. Her faith is her identity. Her culture is her identity. Her race and gender are her identity. And you cannot remove a piece of her identity and say that she should feel like Marwah. We have intersecting identities that lead us to the experiences that we live, that make up these stories, that make up our narratives. Crenshaw has this way of explaining intersectionality as a metaphor for understanding the multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage that can compound themselves, can get stacked one on top of the other on top of the other, that might not be understood through conventional ways of thinking. What happens is we face, through these experiences, ongoing systemic institutional barriers that are very oppressive. And this is a result, it's a very lengthy discussion that we can't get into. But those ongoing effects and impacts of colonialism and settler colonialism are critical in examining the supporting the needs of refugees with disabilities. Because how do we talk about xenophobia if we don't talk about context? In 2018, there was a paper published by the World Refugee Council titled Xenophobia Towards Refugees and Other Forced Migrants. And it describes xenophobia as a belief that leads to behaviors that refuse refugees based on the idea that they're alien or foreign. A concept that exists till today. A concept that impacts people's ability to get a job, to wear what they want, to eat what they want, to talk the way they want. But what's interesting is that concept, there was a time where that was used for people to enter a country. But now it's a concept that is used that regardless of whether or not our people are entering a country, while here, it's a concept that is used to segregate them. And so it manifests itself in policies, in legislation, in practices. That's one oppression. I often have families tell me this, and it's a strange thing to do, but I've sort of kept a tally on how many people share this idea with me. People who I work with. Most recently last week, a mom says to me, "What is it? What is it about me and my kid? Is it because he's in a wheelchair? Is it because I'm Arab? Is it because we wear hijab? Is it because we have accents? Is it because we don't have education? What is it? What is it that makes them treat me the way they treat me?" Well, we have policies and practices that are ingrained within ableism and racism and xenophobia and Islamophobia and so many other oppressions that exist. And we're only touching a few. And so in order to understand, in order to approach this idea that we have to support intersectional needs, we have to understand the problem. There are explicit barriers that impact refugees with disabilities. And I've taken, while this is a very, very short list, I've taken this list from my conversations engaging with these narratives, like I've mentioned a few times, from my own research, and also from the research I've done, from the research I've sort of been using that challenges this single story. Like I said, while Canada is perceived as a leader in human rights, accepting and welcoming persons with disabilities, the social and economic arrangements that currently are in place isolate and exclude refugees with disabilities. Does anyone know, I'm sure you do, how long do you have when you enter Canada to get all your stuff in order? We have 1 year. Do you know how long the wait lists are to access accessible housing? Does anyone know? I most recently called someone to ask, we have a family being evicted, and I say this with like a frantic laughter. 14 years for Toronto housing. 14 years for Toronto housing. We have a system that is not working in our favor when it comes to refugees with disabilities. There are so many barriers to accessing services and supports, but instead of listing all of them, think about your life as I think about mine. Think about if you have kids, where do they go to school? How do you get information? How do you know where to go, especially in this 2021 COVID-19 context? If you're sick or your child is sick, if you need to book an appointment, if you need some support, if you're applying to a job, everything becomes much, much more difficult. Particularly for this population that I speak of. We hear these terms thrown around a lot, and I'm going to stop soon, I promise, and we'll get into some discussion. I'm not trying to be a hater, but I've been part of many DEI conversations recently, and I hear cultural responsiveness and cultural safe practice and cultural humility, and we have to practice these things, people. And while I agree, I think we're using the terms, but we have a long way to go. On the screen, I have 3 different quotes from 3 different people. The first individual says, Canadians feel the way our system here is superior to the so-called third world. We discount everything that is shared with us based on the idea that our knowledge is superior. This is in reference to a parent who took their child to a children's hospital in Ontario and said, my child is exhibiting these behaviors, and the doctor responded, your child needs an autism assessment. And the parent says, but can we talk about the chemical weapons? And the doctor went on to say, I will refer you to an autism specialist and a developmental pediatrician. The second quote says, I expected that here in this country, specifically that has a top rank in taking care of people, I would find what I need, but they don't give the minimum for disabled people. And the third quote says, I took him to another doctor, and the doctor blamed me a lot. The doctor said you should have helped him in other years. Cultural responsiveness is the idea that there's an ability to learn from and respectfully engage with others, learn about yourself and learn about others. That safety piece means that there is a space where somebody is free of discrimination, free of discrimination, of bias, of racism, where they feel safe accessing a particular service. There's a self-reflection involved in that piece. There's an anti-oppression piece that is involved, that is actively involved. That humility piece is there to identify personal and systemic biases. What is the dominant cultural narrative? Are we playing into it a little in our schools and in our hospitals and in our centers and in our services? Or are we actually trying to listen to the narrative that comes to us, that we have the privilege and the honor of interacting with people, whoever they are? In order to move forward, there has to be an urgency of dialogue. Yes, of course, change, but we have to talk about the problem before we tackle it. Identifying and addressing implicit and explicit bias and assumptions and discriminatory practices. How do we view refugees with disabilities? Have we heard our colleagues say something along the lines of, lucky ones? Have we heard people reference taxpayer dollars? We have to understand and know our own privileges as teachers, as healthcare workers, as policymakers, as service providers. I feel like doing a dance when I say that last part. We have to examine and challenge our power dynamics and know our history and do our best to learn about the history of others. And finally, last but definitely not least, the impact of unintended harm. That teacher, Marwah's teacher, might have had good intentions. She may have good intentions. But the harm that was caused on a child who goes to school day in and day out is so powerful. Those subtle things, they add up and they take over. And so we have to do our part to really make sure that those intersectional needs of refugees with disabilities are no longer ignored. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I will read out some of the discussion questions I have. I noticed there's a bunch of comments in the chat section. So I'm going to do my best to share, to respond to them. And actually, I said I was done, but I'm going to share my screen one more time. I apologize. I hope that doesn't cause any technical difficulties. But in terms of the discussion, we have a few minutes. I'd like for us to talk about in our own spaces. I know we're not all from the same space. How can we advocate and how can we challenge this dominant narrative? And the last thing is, how do we make this conversation a priority? And I'm not discounting any of the other amazing conversations that are happening even simultaneously with this one. But from where I'm coming from, I want to know, how do we make this conversation a priority? And I'll ask that this final slide is shared with all of you. But this is how you can reach me and reach my team members. And I would be privileged, honored to hear from any of you. So now I'm going to stop share. And I believe you can unmute yourselves and we can just chat. I'll turn my attention first to the chat that's on display to just make sure that I don't miss anybody's question. There's some really, really amazing, amazing comments in here. Sorry, somebody's screen was frozen. I apologize. I really hope that wasn't mine. And somebody's asking to share the last slide again. I will. I promise. I just want to see, does anyone want to unmute themselves? I believe you're free to unmute yourselves and share some of your thoughts or your own reflections.
Yeah, I can share my reflection. Yeah, my name is like Fazia. I'm from settlement worker at Access Alliance.
Hi,
Yeah,
Fozia.
yeah,
Please,
hi.
please
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah, it was really, really, really amazed. Yeah, your presentation. And I'm working with the newcomers, refugees also, and we worked especially with the Syrian refugees when they came. And still, like, that's why I joined this workshop or presentation. It was in my mind that I really, really need more information, and my focus for the like people who are especially refugees who are with disabilities. And I saw them like it is very hard because of the language barrier, because of the work of the parents they are doing. They are not attending the, I'm not blaming them, but it is really, really difficult that when we try to like we try to assist them,
Hi.
and it is really, really difficult to navigate the
Hey,
system for
you.
them. Yeah, and for us also. Yeah, it's really, I'm feeling so good to attend this, because at least we are listening the different views, that people are sensitive about these issues, and they are really, really trying to learn and work with them.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that comment. I think, our systems are not set up to support um, persons with disabilities, but particularly children with disabilities and their families.
Yeah.
And so I think that, from a systems perspective, like we really have to challenge this idea of, we hear the term universal accessibility and we hear these terms kind of thrown out there, but what does it actually mean, right? And I know the example I gave with my phone is a really, it's a tiny example, but it's a powerful example if you're a parent, the only parent in a class who doesn't get information about your child. And what ends up happening, and I hear this all the time, the distrust between those who are supposed to be helping and those who are on the receiving end grows and grows and grows. And like we here as a service provider, as a healthcare worker, I've often heard families say, I don't want any part of it,
Thank you.
right? And I think part of that is because that distrust is so powerful and so oppressive. So, I appreciate your comments. And Laura, sorry, I think I'm gonna just, sorry, Laura, I went ahead and muted you because I just don't want to hear your conversation. Um, this is being recorded, so I apologize. If you want to unmute yourself and you meant to share a comment, please do. Does anyone have any reflections they want to share or questions they want to ask me? I've put my personal email into the chat. I mean it when I say I would love to hear from you. It's not a fake email address; it's real. So please reach out to me. We are here disrupting a conversation, right? We're all about disruption, right? So we're here disrupting a conversation. We're here disrupting some ideas that might have been lingering for a little bit too long. we're here to disrupt these narratives, and we're here to push forward and to really think about how we can engage with people in a meaningful, purposeful, and respectful way, but beyond that, a way that is not oppressive, and that is something that I think all of us in all of our spaces we can work on. Myself, first and foremost. Any questions?
Sorry, not the questions. My name is Ahlam Mohammed, and I am settlement counselor from Immigrant Working Center, Hamilton area. We are provide services, for the newcomers. We share some experience because we provide services also for newcomers with disability child. The problem always is complaint from the parents. Like before, Fauzia and you share, thank you for that. And always the family missing information about the child program. Also, other things, always the decision came from the school, not from the parents. When we talk with the parents about their experience, how the program's going with the kids, they said, we don't know any idea because only we receive a paper. Especially with the newcomers with the barrier language, they are unable to understand what the paper means for them. What we have to do, we need something, make it simple for the parents to access any program for their disabled children, to feel more comfortable how the kids, because you see, some kids, they refuse to go to the school because they are not familiar with the school, especially with the special needs school. What we have to do, what you think, and how we can make this accessible for the families and for the kids at the same time. Okay, thank you, Sukaina.
Thank you, Ahlam. So
Thank you.
the conversation around children with disabilities in schools, particularly newcomers with disabilities in schools, is a major one. In fact, this whole presentation could have been on just that, and we would barely touch the surface. We are existing within ableist systems. Our public school systems have a long, long way to go when it comes to supporting children with disabilities. We sort of have adopted an inclusive model that is not so inclusive, but that inclusion means we take people and we put them in a classroom. And I don't critique the systems in a silo. I don't critique the systems, just like, just easily. That these are systems that we know we have to work on. And so I appreciate you sharing that, because it's a huge issue. And particularly in the COVID-19 context, information sharing from schools and from healthcare support centers is very, very difficult, very difficult. I don't think it has to be so difficult. It's become so difficult. And what ends up happening is a parent, you're right, gets a piece of paper that says one or two things, and they're expected to know how their child is doing. Somebody mentioned an IEP, and an IEP is an individualized education plan. Do you know how many parents have come to me and said they've had an IEP for a few years? Can we talk about what is that? Imagine. And not one parent. Several parents have said that. Can you tell us what it is? Because everybody keeps on saying it and saying your child has one, and you signed this paper and you signed that paper and you did all these things about goals. But actually, what is it? And so part of it is we're not listening to the stories. And this is not any of you. I'm putting myself as on the end of the people as an OT, as a teacher. I'm putting myself on that end where we have to listen to the stories. We have to engage with people, ask them what do they need. We have to pause before we say things like, don't wear that coat to school, it'll make you stand out. We have to pause before we jump to say that a child should not be in a classroom because they can't cope or because they don't know how to do things. And so I think that, somebody asked here, and I want to get to it before our time runs out, that can we talk about advocating? And I believe, Mehreen, that was your question. And the thing about advocating is we cannot advocate for a solution to a problem that we don't understand. And I think that's why we all need to take, some time to reflect and to share with our colleagues and our family members and our, partners and whoever it is, why we have to look at this particular groups of people. I don't want to say a single population, but people who find themselves, who have these intersectional needs. And why is it that there's a barrier to access? I think Ahlam and before you, Fawzia, both of you mentioned you're from agencies that support refugees. So we have to, even within those agencies, specifically talk about, okay, we're supporting refugees. What about refugees with disabilities? I believe, Parsa, you want to add something in regards to the school. Please go ahead.
Yes. Hi, my name is Parsa. I work for the YMCA of Hamilton, Burlington, Brantford. I'm a Swiss worker, which means a settlement worker in school. So in regards to students with disabilities, there are so many programs out there that not only help in the community, but help the families financially as well. I know Alam was saying she is from Hamilton, and we, with the YMCA, have a whole team of settlement workers in school who help families. Now, we're not experts with children with disabilities, but we do have the information regarding the programs, and we are able to refer the families to the programs that are available in the community. For example, there's ACSD, Assistant for Children with Severe Disabilities. There's a whole long form that you have to fill out. I'm not able to fill that form out for you, but I can refer you to someone who can help you do that, right? So there's other programs like Special Services at Home, which is also another financial program in which you can hire a worker and they can work with the child who has a disability. And the other thing I heard somebody say was that the children going to a special program or a special school. And I know when parents are new to the country, they don't have much information and they feel that, okay, well, this is the right thing to do. But let me tell you, if you do not want to send your child to a special program or a special class, you don't have to. No one can force you to do that. That's your choice and your choice only. So please, my recommendation is that all the organizations, we connect with each other. And I think this program, this conference, this information session was a great way to do that. And I wasn't a refugee, but I was an immigrant with a son who was diagnosed with autism. So I'm not saying I'm an expert, but yeah, I do have some knowledge and I do know some things that can be done and not done. So I'm gonna put my email address in the chat. And if there is anybody who'd like to connect with me, please do so. Like I say, I'm not an expert. I don't know 100%, but maybe I'm able to help with one or two things, right? And if I can make even 0.5% of a difference in somebody's life, some family's life, some child's life, I think my work is done. Thank you.
Thank you, Parsa. I appreciate that. And I agree. I think connecting, in forums such as this one and other forums as well is so important. I don't know, Jesse, if you're there or if you could share some. I'm not sure if we put our email addresses in the chat. Is there, I guess we just have to copy and paste them. I'm not sure if there's a way for us to to share outside of this, because I do believe when the sessions close, then the chat also gets closed on your screen. I do believe this session is recorded. Yes, I gave permission for that. So hopefully it is recorded, Ashley, and I believe it will be available on a YouTube channel. And thank you, Teresa. Hopefully I'm saying your name right. Please correct me if I'm not. Who put information about some resources on OCASI settlement around disability services and support. One thing I hear often from families that I work with regarding funding and regarding forms and all of that is many people actually don't hear about them. And so this is where connecting is so important, because you might have a child in your school, you might work with somebody, you might know somebody who could benefit from a service. And I'll give you an example. If you want to see a specialist, what do? You go to your family doctor, and if you have a good relationship, you say, "Doc, I need to see a neurologist that I have some bad migraines." And your doctor will say, "Okay, you've been complaining about this for a lot. Let me refer you." But that's assuming you have a family doctor. What happens if you don't have a family doctor? You go to a walk-in. I'm going to pick on you, Ashley, because I see your big smile. You go to a walk-in. What does the walk-in say? The walk-in doc says, "Go to your family doctor." 9 out of 10, the walk-in doctor says, "Go see your GP." And then you say, "But I don't have a GP." Get one. Okay, that's a great idea. How do you get a GP? Bing, bing, bing. You go to different walk-ins until somebody accepts you. You call around. Now let's say you're a family that I recently worked with, a single mom of 7, just came from Afghanistan. Okay, now what? Needs an interpreter. Now what? Has a child with a disability. Now what? All these become compounded. And what ends up happening is then, few years down the line, somebody says, your kid could have gotten all of these things to that parent, right? And we've seen this play out, and honestly, it was the reason why we formed an organization, and we work with similar organizations. There's a beautiful organization called Parents of Black Children in Toronto. There's an organization called SAC, also in Toronto, that supports South Asian families and other families as well. Parsa, you are so right. We need to connect. We need to connect with each other. We need to grow our connection so that we are as responsive as possible, and actually, getting to those services for people who frankly want them and need them. So going back to the chat, Teresa sent some more resources, and some people have put in some email addresses. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Doctors should be giving this information. Yes. You have 5 minutes tops. And in 5 minutes, this is what I mean by our systems, though. Like, I'm not here to hate on the school system or the healthcare system. Who am I to do that? But our systems are built on a history that oppresses people who are foreign, who are considered alien, people who are not considered the rights people. This is a system that impacts, like I mentioned earlier, our classroom curriculums. It's a system that excludes our children with disabilities. And as a mom of a 5-year-old who goes through services and supports, it's important that we are tackling these systems. And I think all of us can do our part. There are some really, really great comments on the chat, and Widad says, my understanding, it is difficult to have a child on an IEP. One teacher told me in school, the school advanced one of my clients to get a child on a program when the family had another child might benefit from an IEP, but the school could not approve him through the board. I think the problem that I see, and with that, I'm not going to speak to the individual you're talking about, is that there's so much red tape, right? There's step after step after step, and it is very difficult to get the supports that people need. But I do think when we connect and we share our resources and we share our experiences and we share our own stories, we're able to connect a bit more. I would ask that you turn your attention to the chat. Grace has shared their email address from OCASI as from settlenet.org, I believe, OCASI as well. Please take a look. I'd copy and paste all of these so that we have them. Ashley has a question in here. Have you encountered or are aware of any stories where an adult refugee has been apprehended by police under mental distress? What was the outcome? Ashley, unfortunately, I have a few, I've worked with a few individuals who have been, had the police called on them in their homes because of noise disturbances. And it really is difficult to share, but the children were making vocalizations. And as a result of these vocalizations, the neighbors called the police on not one, not two, but 3 families that I know. And as a result, the police came, and it wasn't because the father was in one situation, very distressed, very, very upset. And that was taken as, him not cooperating. An interpreter was not involved. And we were able to get some legal support, but the trauma that occurred from that situation, it's a lot, and it's ongoing. But I think that's an area that really needs to be looked at. And while that's not my area of expertise, the responses for individuals who are experiencing some difficulty, and the perception of that experience is very, very traumatic, and it leads to a lot of very negative outcomes. And I do think that needs to be addressed. So Ashley, I guess you're doing your PhD now.
Many of the things that you had shared today, I could relate to from an indigenous perspective, from the indigenous community, because it's so similar in like the cultural basis and the, I guess, oppression that comes along with cultural communities. And so I'm thinking about like disabilities being so array, so diverse. There's so many different ones that we could look into, and how each of those, kind of get treated or perceived by society differently. The different systems would treat them differently, approach them differently. And I think like, especially with COVID-19 and a lot of everybody's, everybody, doesn't matter how educated you are, what your job is, how busy you are, you're going to experience that increase of stress, and how it affects your mental health. So then when we look at people who are disabled, people with disabilities, whether it's a mental or a physical, their mental health is also kind of extra stressed. It's been impacted a little bit more. And so how does the system support that? Is like, if there's anything being differently done. And as service providers, we're kind of like that front line, the first people that can be called, the most accessible to intervene. So if we know that there's a client that's going through some distress, or there's some triggers going on that we know, maybe we should call and check up on them, maybe do a wellness check, Instead of maybe once a month, maybe we increase that to twice a month or even once a week if needed. But not even just to that individual, but even the extending family,
Yeah.
checking on the other family members that are there. So just some stuff that I was thinking about.
No, it's a great point, and I appreciate that, and I think that it speaks to that we need to do better in our spaces, right? We need to do better at identifying what the problems are so that we can address them, so that people it doesn't go unchecked. And you mentioned like a wellness call. When COVID-19 hit. One of the things that Smile implemented was these weekly wellness calls. And in a 10-minute approximately conversation, what we heard is is so powerful. And a lot of it was around information, a lot of it was fear, a lot of it was refugees expressing how the current restrictions, how it made them feel, how it brought up some feelings from a few years prior. And those conversations are so important. Those stories they're not isolated. And so I think, listening to people, hearing what they have to say, I would say, especially for those of us who are on those front lines, it's a privilege to be on that phone call. It's a privilege to sit across from someone and to be the one to hear the story and to then help them navigate. And on the chat here, we have so many people just kind of, sharing resources and email addresses. And, I appreciate all of you attending this session. I was kind of thinking nobody was going to come because I teach first year university and honestly, they don't show up. But I'm really grateful to have this conversation, and I think it's gonna get shut off soon. So I promised I would share that final slide. So I'm gonna do that right now. And like I said, I really hope that you get in touch and you connect with us. Personally, I'm not a social media savvy person, but you can connect if you are. You can connect with our team on, I guess, TikTok and Instagram and these other grams, whatever they are. But you're welcome to email me, and we can connect that way, and we can see what we can do, and try and bring this conversation a little bit more mainstream and into different spaces. We'll sneak in there, I promise. And then for those of you who are interested, I have some some references and resources to share. Just drop me an email, and hopefully I'll get that to you. So just looking at this chat, I'm going to quickly copy as many of these addresses as I can as well. Thank you so much, and we can hopefully connect. There's got to be a more accessible way to do this. So I don't know if if any of the organizers are hearing me, but if there's a way to sort of ask the attendees if we can maybe share a list for those of you who want to.
I did see in the lobby, there is a button on there for networking. And if you were to search my name in there, it'll bring you to my profile, and my email is on there.
Oh, so excellent. Thank you. I'm clearly not very good at the tech piece of all of this, but thank you. I will definitely look to connect with all of you. Sangha, I'm gonna put it, I don't know if you're talking to me or somebody else, but I'm gonna put mine again. It's just my first name dot my last name at smilecan.org. Thank you everybody for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day and a great weekend.
You should also see, if you hit the three dots on the chat, it should open up a save chat option, and you can export the whole chat as a text document.
Oh, excellent. Did everyone hear that? So we can actually save the chat. That's amazing. All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye. Jesse, I can hop off now, correct?
Yeah, if you're done, you can take off. I can end the
All right.
meeting, or people can just leave.
All right. Thank you so much.